Hi all, I am not sure to even start. I'm not a regular Redditor, but I do sometimes browse the site when bored. I looked online to see if I could find any information regarding my issue. Well, at least not anything helpful. Never though I'd be making this kind of post, but here I am. Apologies if this gets long, I haven't really been able to gather my thoughts. Background: so I, 32, met my now husband, 37, who I'll call Dave, not his real name, about 5 years ago. We have been married for 2.5 years now. We have an adorable 20-month-old daughter, and I am currently 4 months pregnant. We just bought a house a couple years ago, in the suburbs outside of a larger metropolitan area. Dave was an acquaintance of a coworker, Mark, so about 5 years ago I started to see him frequently at the bar we'd go get drinks at after work. I'll admit that at first I wasn't particularly attracted to him, not that he's ugly, he just wasn't the type I was into at that point in my life. Anyway, when Dave started coming around, he would after a while try to chit-chat with me. It was obvious he was interested, but I tried to decline his advances as gently as I could. He was persistent, and one night after maybe one drink too many, I agreed to go on a date with him. I remember the date started out a bit awkward, as our previous encounters had always been within a group, so it was the first time it was just the two of us. Plus, I admit I didn't really want to be there. I had actually considered canceling, but I was having really bad luck dating at that point, more on that later, so I decided that since I had no other plans, why not? Anyway, the date started out slow, and it was mostly Dave talking for the first half. But then after a while he started bringing up some topics that I was interested in, a hobby, and a particular cause which I felt strongly about. The second half of the date was much better, and I was kind of surprised to learn that Dave and I actually had some things in common. I was still hesitant, but decided to give Dave a chance, and although he definitely liked me a lot more than I like him in the beginning, our relationship slowly began to grow, and eventually I fell in love with him. Since then, I would say that we have had a really good relationship. He is my best friend, an excellent father, and a great husband. Furthermore, he is a good provider as well. Once our daughter was born, we decided that it made the most financial sense for me to quit my job and stay home. It was a role that I admittedly was not 100% on board with in the beginning, but when we looked at the numbers, it was just the most logical decision. Despite my initial hesitancy, I have since grown to love it. I honestly couldn't imagine having to spend so much time away from my daughter, but I recognize that because of my husband, we are in a very fortunate position to do so. I know that many families cannot live off of just one income. I don't want to give away too much personal information, so I'll only say that my husband works in IT. We are not rich by any stretch of the imagination, but we are able to live a modest, middle-class lifestyle on just my husband's income. Except for the rare couples fight, things between my husband and I have generally been really good. We get along well, and up until last night I would have said that my life is ideal. The issue, like many people, my husband has been working at home since the whole virus mess started. It took a little bit of adjustment, but it hasn't been too bad. As my husband works in IT, his work hasn't been disrupted too much by having to work remotely. I think the change in environment has been the biggest issue. To stay connected, my husband has been meeting virtually once or twice a week with friends or coworkers. Last night he was playing games with his little brother, Tom, 30, and a couple of his friends. While playing these games, my husband had a few beers. He rarely drinks, but since the lockdown, he has been having 2 to 3 beers usually on Friday nights when meeting virtually. This is not a problem in my opinion, and I only mention it because he does not have much of a tolerance for alcohol. This is relevant because last night he had more than his usual 2 to 3 beers. So after I put our daughter to bed, I checked my cell phone to see that I had a message from Tom's girlfriend. They've been dating for about 1.5 years now, and since they only live about an hour away, we frequently double date. I like Tom and his girlfriend, so I was super excited when I opened her message to see that they were now officially engaged. It was a big group chat, so it was filled with messages of congratulations. I noticed that in one message, Tom had written big, "Thanks to Dave," without whose advice I would have never gotten this far. I personally thought it was very sweet. Seemed like they were looking to us as an example. I immediately ran downstairs to my husband to talk to him about it. I knew he was playing games with Tom, so he obviously must have known earlier about the engagement. I sat on the couch and we started talking about how long Tom had been planning this out, how much did the ring cost, when was the wedding, etc. I noticed that Dave was a bit drunk, which I guess was the result of him celebrating his little brother's next step in life. While cuddling, I mentioned to him about how what a good example he was to Tom, and this is where it all began. The whole night was such a whirlwind, that I don't even remember everything little thing, but basically, Dave told me about how he helped Tom make his girlfriend, now fiancée, fall in love with him. I asked what he meant, and he went into this whole story, which I had never heard before, about how he got me to fall in love with him. The true story of how we met, how we fell in love, and how our relationship blossomed. Dave was clearly drunk, and I was just so shocked, that all I could do was stupidly smile and act like everything was no big deal. I think this just made him open up even more. The real story, according to my husband, is that he first found me on a dating site about half a year before we ever met. He claims that he initially sent me a message, but that I just ignored him. He looked kind of hurt when talking about this, but I told him that women get hundreds of messages a week on those sites, and there was just no way that I could read through all of them, much less respond. He claims that I did read his, but no response. He said that we ranked very highly in compatibility, had a lot of the same interests, and that he just knew we'd make the perfect couple. So apparently after this, he started creating a bunch of fake profiles. He stole pictures of very attractive men from social media profiles. He said he would make minor changes so as not to be reverse searched. I never even considered that. Using these profiles, he started, basically, catfishing me. Over the course of a couple months, he was able to initiate conversations with me on numerous occasions with different profiles, and eventually at some point I guess I mentioned where I worked. He said he then spent hours searching through Facebook and LinkedIn before he found my picture. At that point he had my name, and started hardcore stalking me online. He had created numerous social media profiles, some of which I accepted as friends/followers, so then he was able to stalk my life. After a couple months, according to him, he started stalking me in real life. He said that he started going to hang out at the bar we always went to after work, and befriended Mark, a co-worker of mine. Mark worked in IT, like Dave, and although nice, he was socially awkward and a bit of a loner. I was always surprised when he would join us for happy hour because he usually would just sip on his beer and not say anything. Anyway, I guess Dave started stalking Mark, and became his friend somehow. So then when we'd meet for happy hour, Dave would invariably start to hang out with my group of coworkers and I. It seemed to work out well, because Dave was pleasant, and Mark seemed to open up a bit more when he was around. So this went on for like a month, and then Dave started trying to hit on me. Again, he's not a bad-looking guy, but he just wasn't my type. After a month or two, I eventually agreed. As mentioned before, I was drunk, and having terrible luck in the dating game. My bad luck was actually Dave's fake profiles. I kept chatting with guys who I thought I would have really gotten along with. In some cases we chatted for weeks, and then when it was time to meet, I kept getting blown off. It was a huge hit to my self-esteem. One night, after waiting for over an hour for my date to show up, I finally went back to my car and just cried. I just couldn't understand it, and honestly started having doubts about myself. One particularly cruel episode was after another date with one of Dave's fake profiles. I received a text message which said something like I didn't look as good as my pictures, and was accused of catfishing him. The next week during our happy hour was when I finally agreed to go on a date with Dave. I guess he essentially tore me down, so that I would feel like shit and agree to go out with him. When I asked him about all the different phone numbers, he claimed that he had bought a few burner phones. Like what the hell? But wait, it gets worse. Something I had never told Dave about was that when we first started dating, I actually was talking with someone else. I was not completely into Dave like he was into me at the beginning, so when this gorgeous guy began messaging me on the dating site I was using, I started chatting with him. After constantly being blown off on dates, I was very cautious when I was talking to Alex, so even though things seemed to be going well, I still kept talking to Dave as well. I wanted to be sure that Alex wasn't just another jerk before I made any decisions with Dave. So Alex and I went on our first date, which was absolutely great, until the end. The date was off to a good start, because he actually showed up, lol, and he was even more handsome in real life. I couldn't believe that someone like him was so interested in me. As I said, my self-esteem was absolutely in the gutter by now. So the date goes great, we get along, we're laughing and staring into each other's eyes. I haven't felt this kind of connection ever. I remember my heart fluttered, and I even butterflies in my stomach. I honestly thought it was love at first sight. Up until the end, it really was a magical night, like something out of a movie. We had had a couple glasses of wine, but neither of us were drunk, but we were feeling good. After we got out of the bar, we started making out a bit in the parking lot behind. I just felt so good in that moment, and I really thought that finally I had found a guy who I connected with, and it had been a while since I'd been with anyone. So I lost myself a bit in the passion, and suggested that Alex come home with me. I still remember the way his face just dropped. His beautiful blue eyes just became cold as ice, and his body just tensed up. He stepped back, said sorry, I'm not into S-word, and walked off. It was one of the most devastating moments of my life. I never would have guessed something like that happening, not after the night we just shared, and I was honestly in shock. I thought it was maybe a stupid joke, but he seriously just turned and walked away. After what felt like forever, I realized he wasn't coming back, and I swear I had a full-on breakdown. I remember that my stomach just felt like someone had punched me, then began painfully twisting it. I couldn't breathe and just began full-on sobbing. I don't remember if anyone saw me or not, but no one came up to me or said anything. I cried all the tears I could, and after there was nothing left, I managed to catch my breath after a while, and finally walked home. I had some very dark thoughts that night. I couldn't stop beating myself up, ruining what I thought was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Honestly, even during my marriage, I still frequently thought about Alex. For me, he was the one that got away, and I had blamed myself for years. I guess I should mention that the Saturday night when I went out with Alex, I had actually canceled plans with Dave. When he texted me the next day to go mini golfing, I was only too happy to go. Looking back, I seriously attached myself to Dave after that, and our so-called fairy tale love grew from then on. Now why is this all worth mentioning? Last night, while Dave was, proudly, telling me about all that he had done in order to be with me, he mentioned that he had even paid a guy to date me. When I inquired further, he told me about how Alex was actually paid by Dave to go out on a date with me. The idea was to do a couple dates, then ditch me. I guess to wreck my self-esteem? I don't even know, but I was in absolute shock. I had never mentioned Alex to Dave, and we had only exchanged messages for a couple weeks, and then it was only one date. I didn't want Dave to know that I had been talking to other guys in the beginning, so of course I wasn't going to mention it. So that just made everything all too real. Dave seemed to have been best friends since we were 16 years old. We bonded over both wanting the same career path. After years of struggling and tons of rejection, my career for the past year has finally been taking off, while Mark's has not. I've spent so much time trying to help him, also this past year trying to encourage and help him. We even lived together as roommates from ages 20 to 23 and shared everything. But about 6 months ago his attitude towards me changed. He started making me the butt of his jokes, saying belittling and demeaning things. I was, kind of a happy-go-lucky type of guy, and I just brushed it off. Thought he was just a little jealous and having a hard time and was understanding of his situation. I get it, it's a harsh environment to want to work in with tons of rejections and seeing your friends suddenly get the success you have always dreamt of. And then there is my ex-girlfriend Emily, 26. I thought we had the perfect relationship, together for 5 years. Good communication, good intimate life. She stood by me all these rough years trying to get ahead in this career path. I'm also a big oversharer and love to talk to her about everything. We had no secrets and were very honest, so I thought. I always made an effort to keep the relationship fresh and fun, date nights 1 to 2 a week, surprise her with gifts, trips, trying to do new things together, cooking classes, dance classes. I just loved sharing experiences with her, indulging in her hobbies. Made sure she knew she was my number one person. And I thought I felt the same from her. Even as my career took off, I made sure not to prioritize her any less, or any of my friends. I need a good work/life balance to feel happy. Last week we were all at our friend's house, Tom and Katie, 27, a house they recently bought. We were sitting in their yard drinking, along with Bill, 26, and Jane, 2F. We have been a friend group for 7 years. So we are all drinking and Mark gets drunk pretty quick, and all night he is taking these jabs at me and saying things, and after 6 months of this I just get enough. The others also told him to take it down a notch as he tried to disguise these comments as jokes, but he was just being hurtful and rude. But around midnight, a little drunk, I just get enough and call him out, which ends in an argument, and I end up saying, thinking this all stems from his jealousy of my recent success, that it's not my fault he doesn't have the talent to make it, and mention all I've tried doing for him so he could get opportunities as well. Then he just attacks me. We shove each other a bit, but he manages to knock me down, kicks me in the ribs a couple of times, then he tries to stomp on my head. Luckily he doesn't hit me full force. I feel the sole of his feet hit my cheek and slip off, but it was hard enough that my face is still swollen. Then he does it again, but I move and just see as he'll land full force inches from my face. He would have broken my skull or worse, unalived me, had he landed on my head. Then the other guys get in between. I stand up and yell if he is crazy. He seems to be walking up, but he picks up a wooden plank. Tom and Katie are redoing the fence and building a shed in the garden. Then he lunges at me again and swings it towards my head. I kind of duck and put my hand up so he hits my elbow pretty hard. Again, he could have unalived me 2 times in a matter of seconds. He almost hit Jane with the swing also, so all hell breaks loose and Tom and Bill jump him and beat him up pretty bad as they were just seeing red from what happened. The girls manage to get them off Mark and they kind of realize what they did. It's just emotional chaos at this point and we are all kind of in shock. Mark sits up and Emily sits with him and there is a lot of blood in his face, but he doesn't lose consciousness. Katie ends up driving Mark to the hospital. And gets back in the morning. Mark had a broken nose and a slight concussion and she dropped him off at his parents'. She said Mark didn't really talk to her, explain himself or even apologize. None of us really slept that night, and honestly after that things are a bit blurry to me. Probably a mix of alcohol, shock and adrenaline and the worst night of my life, but it just got worse. You might have noticed I haven't mentioned Emily for a while. We are sitting around and Tom says something like Mark deserved worse than a broken nose for trying to unalive me twice and almost hurting Jane. Then Emily, who has been quiet, suddenly snaps and defends Mark, saying he doesn't deserve any of this and that he just has been having a hard time. Tom and Emily almost end up in a screaming match before Emily storms off. I follow her, thinking okay, we are all in shock and sleep deprived, and plan to comfort her. I find her in the guest room crying. I tell her I understand and we are in shock and maybe we should just try to get some sleep. She doesn't even look at me and suddenly I realize Mark and Emily were sitting next to each other the previous evening, not the first time. When Mark was screaming at me, Emily was by his side, tugging at his arm, pleading him to take a walk with her and calm down, to Mark, not me. After Mark kicked me, stomped on me, swung a plank at me, her attention was still on calming him down. While I laid down in pain, she didn't check on me. When the guys were beating Mark, she was screaming in hysterics trying to pull them off him. I don't even remember her asking me once if I was okay all night. So I ask her, are you cheating on me with Mark? And she just starts crying hysterically and repeating she never intended for it to go this far. And I got my answer and I just lost it and started yelling at her what is going on and how she can do this. The others come in and the guys take me to another room and try to calm me down. Jane and Katie end up driving Emily to her parents, and Jane ends up staying with her as apparently they were worried about her. All the car ride she cried so much she couldn't speak. When they got to her parents', Jane and Emily's dad had to help her up the stairs and into bed as she barely stood up as she was just in hysterics still, and the only thing she managed to say, or scream according to them, was that she had ruined everything. So Jane stayed as her parents were worried sick and never seen her like this. Jane and Katie told them what had happened with Mark and me, and it seemed to stem from Mark and Emily's affair. Then 5 days pass. I'm just in so much physical and emotional pain. Just so angry and confused. My elbow has a fracture, got a couple of bruised ribs and the right side of my face swollen. The night is on repeat in my head. I sent Emily some texts asking for an explanation, but she didn't answer. Then this morning I got a call from my former mother-in-law, and bless their hearts, my former in-laws are amazing people and have always been so kind to me and helped me a lot these past years. She is very apologetic for her daughter and is very understanding. Then she says that Emily wants to see me and talk and if I could come over, which I agreed to. I arrive and they say they will go outside and wait in their car to give us space, but because of the state Emily is in, they don't want to leave the premise. I walk in and when I see Emily, it's a roller coaster of emotion, anger and bitterness. Then I felt sorry for her and just wanted to hug her. She looked awful, like a mental patient. Like she hadn't eaten, showered or slept since that night. I just felt so bad seeing her like that and had to restrain myself not to run over and take her in my arms. So I just sat down facing her. She said I could ask her anything and she would be honest, and kept repeating how sorry she is and that she has ruined everyone's life. I'm not going to go into too much detail as this is long enough. But basically a year ago Mark confessed his love for Emily and has been very persistent since then. She said she made it clear it wasn't mutual. I asked why she didn't come to me. She says she didn't want to ruin our friendship and wanted to fix things. Then lastly, he has become more aggressive, asking her to leave me for him. I asked if anything had happened. She said they kissed twice and Mark initiated both times, but she stopped it. And they once cuddled over a movie that Mark tried to initiate intimacy and then she left and set clear boundaries. I asked why she kept seeing him alone if he was constantly trying to kiss her and get her into bed. She said he always promised he wouldn't do it again. I asked why she didn't cut contact, why she kept answering his DMs, kept meeting him, giving him false hope and leading him on, if she liked his attention. Then she said the strangest thing, that she felt bad for him, felt sorry for him, felt protective of him like she was his big sister, what the hell, and she needed to help him get over her, that she even set him up on a date with a friend which he sabotaged by being a jerk to the girl. I asked her if she was stupid, if she was telling the truth. She did nothing but keep his hope and crush for her alive by giving him all her time. She started crying and doubled down on having a sister-brother relationship with him and wanting to fix everything, and that he was just having a hard time and she wanted to help him to get on his feet again. But he kept getting more persistent and started talking about me in a bad way and that I didn't deserve her. She says she regrets everything and said she was just stupid and had ruined everything and dealt with everything in the worst way possible, but she did it in good faith, not realizing she was just making things worse. Then I ask her if she has had any contact with him since that night, and she takes this awkward pause before starting bawling her eyes out and saying yes. That just destroyed me, completely ruined me. This man, for over a year, tried to get with her, tried to unalive me, and I wait 5 days for her to answer me, only for her mother to call me on her behalf, and meanwhile she is texting with him? I couldn't answer. I just felt like hurting her, not physically, but emotionally, so I decided to just get up and go. She pleads with me, offers to show me the texts, saying she just checked if he was okay, and then the discussion went to her telling him it's over and to stop contacting her. But for me, she made her choice. I was in the worst pain in my life these last 5 days because of them, and she still chose to continue to talk to him while I was on my own. I walk out with her following me pleading, and I'm not proud of this, but her mom and dad get out of the car and ask if everything is alright, and I just lose it. I yell that their C-word of a daughter has ruined my life, how she could choose the man who tried to stomp on my face over me. I was so angry I couldn't even drive, so I just start walking away. I don't know how long I was walking, but my ex-father-in-law drove next to me, told me to get in, which I did, expecting him to yell at me or tell me off, but bless his heart, he just drove me home. We didn't talk all the way, but when he stopped outside of my place he put his hand on my shoulder. I couldn't even look him in the face after what I said to them. Emily did text me a screenshot of their texts, which seems to prove what she said, that she only checked if he was okay and then said she couldn't keep him in his life. That she would never forgive him for attacking me. She also sent more screenshots of their previous chats, mostly of her telling him to stop, that she didn't have feeling for him, and of her rejecting his advances. But as they have been talking for over a year, I guess she could cherry pick parts of the conversations that look in her favor and leave other parts of texts out. I have not responded yet, and I don't think I ever will, and I will block her, but for some reason I just can't yet. Now I'm here just getting this all out of me. I just feel so betrayed and angry and horrible. I want to hurt Emily and Mark so bad, not in a violent way, just emotionally, make them feel the pain I'm feeling, and I know that's not a healthy way to feel, or a healthy thing to do, so I hope just writing this out, even if no one reads this, will help me start to process what the hell has happened. How my life went from feeling perfect to feeling like I will never feel good again. I feel like this pain will never go away. How on earth can someone heal from this? I feel like I lost everything. The people I used to love with all my heart, I feel nothing but hatred for now. I know Emily said she didn't cheat as in had intimacy, which I doubt because I'm not stupid. Even if they didn't have intimacy, she still betrayed me on so many levels, as did Mark. I don't think I will ever forgive them. I don't feel like I will ever get in a place where I would even consider trying. So to anyone who has ever been through a betrayal like this from partners or friends or both, what is my next step? How can I begin the process to just stop thinking about this and just start trying to live my life again? 29. And he's already got 4 kids now. He had his first at 22, and the second followed a year later. Then the third 2 years after that. And the fourth is the most recently born a couple months ago. His wife, my sister-in-law, and I do not get along, as she always likes to try and get a rise out of me by acting superior. Then turns into an extreme self-victimizing drama queen if I retaliated against her in any way. She can cry in an instant and can put on an extremely convincing show to get sympathy from just about anyone. My parents and brother absolutely adore her, even though they know exactly how she really is and just don't care. She's very good looking, I'll give her that. But she's so awful that I could never be attracted to her. She also refuses to get any sort of job, even though she has a college degree, and my mother willingly helps with the kids all day. So their finances are entirely dependent on my brother. This also means they can't afford to live anywhere but my parents' house. And privacy is a bit of an issue with all of them under one roof in a 3-bedroom house that was built in the 60s. Growing up, my younger brother was also the obvious favorite. We're 3 years apart in age, but he developed a superiority complex because I was badly punished if I retaliated against his antics in any way back then. It was obvious my parents cared for him a lot more because he got the lion's share of everything unless people called them out on it. Which did happen a fair bit by other members of family. Which is why my parents packed us all up and moved us about 150 miles away from them, so they generally would only see us on holidays since it was a 3-hour drive. My brother got physically abusive towards me on a number of occasions, flirted relentlessly with my first girlfriend to the point she broke up with me, and laughed at any misfortune I had. And my parents just told me to suck it up whenever I was upset about it. I only got equal treatment when my parents wanted to keep up appearances. I admit it was rather funny to see the looks on their faces whenever they had to treat me equal to my brother on birthdays and Christmas because other people were present. We had relatives that were very nosy, and loved gossiping drama. So my parents did their best to hide what was really going on, and threatened to take all my stuff away if I didn't keep my mouth shut. If anything, it just made my parents celebrate more when I turned 18 and moved out because it meant they no longer had to provide for me. I wasn't even done with high school yet when I moved out. But couch surfing was far better than living with them. I was low contact ever since leaving home. They didn't even show up for my high school graduation. But I really didn't care. From that point on I would usually only see my parents and brother on holidays like the rest of the family. The start 2020 pandemic was not kind to me. I lost my job, and couldn't renew the lease on the condo because my roommate also lost his job and neither of us could afford the place on unemployment money. It was a rented 2-bedroom condo that I really loved. As the lease was ending, my roommate left early to move back in with relatives, and I had to sell nearly all of my stuff because I was soon going to be homeless if I didn't downsize to an extreme. I really shouldn't have rented a place that was so expensive. But I liked living the high life. Until that life wasn't kind to me. And I realized I should have been living somewhere far cheaper so I could have saved more money to fall back on. But I had a plan. I own a truck simply for the fact that I've always loved trucks, so I found a $1,000 camper in good shape and put it on my truck just so I could live out of it for a while. It was supposed to be temporary, but I ended up living out of it far longer than I ever thought. I originally was hoping to be able to live out of the camper at my parents' house, where my brother and his family still reside as well. But when I asked my parents to let me stay for a while, they told me they had a full house, and didn't want me there. Plus, we hadn't exactly gotten along in the past decade. They said they'd only agree to let me park my camper there if I paid them basically what it'd cost to rent an apartment in my area. That was way too much just to park my camper. I was jobless and trying to save as much of my unemployment money as I could till I could find a new job. I may as well be living in an apartment with that rent price they were asking. My parents called my camper an eyesore and told me to take a hike since we couldn't come to an agreement. And sister-in-law thought it was absolutely hilarious I had to live in a camper. My brother joined her in pointing at and mocking me while calling me a homeless bum. I parked my truck/camper in a store parking lot to sleep on the first night that I had nowhere else to go. I felt scared out of my mind that someone might try to break in. Suffice to say I didn't sleep well that night. There was nowhere else I could go as any other relatives that owned houses were fairly far away, and all my friends were all apartment people. And I was pretty attached to my area as well. So I didn't want to just leave. I'd also had my mail forwarded to a friend's apartment. It was the only way I could still get my mail anymore. Finding a stable place to park was pretty difficult. I went looking around to try and find a job similar to my old one. It took months of living the nomadic camper life. In that time, I had to deal with a lot. Everything from beggars and drug addicts, to people demanding I leave because my camper was an eyesore. At one point someone who told me to move claimed to be with an HOA. I wasn't even parked on a street with houses. And when I questioned what HOA, they got incredibly belligerent and threatened me. I moved my camper anyway just to avoid the trouble. In order to have a steady supply of electricity I learned to use a long extension cord to plug in anywhere I could to recharge my camper batteries. This meant sneaking around and plugging it into an outside outlet of a random building while parked on a street. I know that's a crummy thing to do. But I had to keep my batteries charged so my refrigerator would stay cold. I had a small solar power bank for recharging my phone. But I didn't have anything like a generator. And generators are noisy and require fuel anyway. So I did what I had to do. After months of living like that, I finally managed to get a new job. I had to move to the neighboring city to find a job that didn't involve retail. I worked retail while in college and promised myself never again. Though I was nearly ready to break that promise. I was still getting unemployment money. But I had no stable place to live while receiving it. And I didn't want to still be jobless when it ran out. Plus I was bored out of my mind. I had little else to do but read, watch movies on a small portable DVD player, use my phone or laptop, and keep note of where I could park and what local public bathrooms I could use. I kind of envy that the Japanese have public bathhouses. We could really use stuff like that over here. When I finally landed a new job, I practically lived in the back lot of the building by the warehouse in old employee parking spaces literally no one else seemed to bother using because they were so far in the back that the area was borderline forgotten. My boss/company owner actually liked this arrangement because I was willingly available to take any shift I could get, so long as I had enough sleep. He even let me take the camper off my truck and set it up in one of the spaces so I could drive around without it. Not exactly sure if this was legal, but no one bothered us about it. The entire time I lived back there, I didn't have to deal with many trespassers. There were a few, but the security guards escorted them out. I was pretty much on call almost all the time when they needed me, and was working virtually every day of the week. My boss let me plug my camper into the building for power and water, and I paid a small amount of rent by working for free on Sundays when no one else was in the office but the janitor and security guard. Beyond that, I usually had to shower at a friend's apartment, or at my local gym as the camper didn't have a shower in it, and only a portable toilet. And I didn't want to fill it because emptying it is a nasty chore. So I used other bathrooms as often as I could. I had a key to the warehouse, and could go in to use the bathroom there at any hour. I was even on a first-name basis with the night security guard. He's since become one of my closest friends. The camper was easy to heat in the winter with a small electric heater. Summers were not fun though. The camper didn't have AC, so I had to get a used portable air conditioner just to make it bearable. I made a lot of overtime pay, and hands-on learned some new skills from other employees. Eventually midway into this year I landed a better position in the company as a supervisor, and started making a better salary than my old job. That's when I decided I wanted a house. The scare I'd gotten from losing my condo made me realize I needed something much more stable for the long term. I looked around for something close to my work, and just 2 miles away found a 3-bedroom manufactured home on a small property. But I managed to get it for $10,000 less than the asking price somehow. I used nearly my entire savings for a down payment and got approved for a home loan. I finally didn't have to live in a camper anymore. There was enough space for me to back my truck in behind the house to take the camper off to set it up in the backyard. So I put it there as its own little building just in case I want to use it again. When I was fully settled in the house, I was dumb enough to brag about it on my book of faces. My family saw the post, and that's where this stuff really starts. After a few weeks my parents and brother along with his family came to visit completely unannounced to have a tour of my home. I didn't even give them my address. So how they found out where I live, I still don't know. None of my friends have fessed up, and no prior family members visited me before that. So I wonder if they stalked me at work and followed me home or something. It really wouldn't surprise me. Once I opened the door, they practically all shoved their way in like rambunctious tourists. Then just started making themselves at home. They all kept poking around and sister-in-law had this creepy smirk that she was repeatedly flashing me. And it was only later that I figured out why. And it made me madder than a bull on steroids that just got stung by a hornet. My parents were constantly talking about how I've got so much extra space now. And it's too much for someone like me who has no wife or kids. Sure, not now. But maybe someday, and my brother kept remarking about how there was more space than our parents' house, and my house was closer to his job too. Red flags all around, I know. Eventually my brother asked me to speak privately. Everyone else suddenly left the room and piled out onto the front porch. That's what finally made me realize they'd planned something. My brother, let's call him Dan for the sake of simplicity, said the house was too much for me alone. And I should let him move in with his family because his wife is pregnant with kid number 4. And my house is much closer to his job. He pointed out that I already have the camper, so I could just live in that outside while they live in the main house. And I'd like to point out that Dan never once spoke of offering rent. Mind you, he's got a good job. He also started talking about how there would be changes, and even curfews. And that I couldn't just walk in at any time without prior notice. If it weren't my brother, I'd think the person I was talking to had lost their mind. But Dan lost his marbles long ago thanks to our parents treating him like he was the center of the world. I tried to speak, but he kept talking over me as if I had no say in the matter. There was no way in hell I'd rent my house or parts of my house to him. Other people maybe, just so I can pay the mortgage off more easily. But certainly not him, or his nasty wife. I've heard of this exact kind of situation in videos online many times. And never once did I think I'd actually live it because I thought it so ludicrous. But my parents, brother and sister-in-law do all fit the bill for a bunch of narcissistic entitled crazies. So I picked up my phone and set it to start recording. Then just held onto it. Dan didn't even seem to care or notice that I'd done this, and just sat there with his arms waving around while talking about all the reasons of why he needed my house. Then went from saying that to acting like it was a done deal and trying to reach out his hand to shake mine. That's when I finally showed my backbone and said hell no. And I said it loud enough that Dan stumbled backward for a second. I'd rarely ever raised my voice to him on that level because I was punished by our parents whenever I did. But this was my house, not theirs. My spine can be as shiny as it wants here. I stood up and then told him that my house was not up for grabs. And acting like I'll let him move in just because they want it, won't make it happen. I bought my house for me, and it's not my fault he keeps having more kids and has to keep living with our parents because he can't afford to move out. Dan got as physically close to me as he could without actually touching me and said that I didn't deserve the house, and he needed a better place for his family to live. I laughed back in his face. And said that was total bull because I worked hard to be able to buy my house. Of course I deserved it. Dan started yelling that I have no wife or kids, and I don't need all the space. So I may as well give it to him. I said I'm not giving him anything. And he never even offered to pay me rent. If I let him move in, I'd still be covering the entire mortgage on my own house without even being able to live in my own house. Then Dan told me that he shouldn't have to pay rent because his family comes first, and I am 26 and my husband is 30. Mother-in-law is 70 years old. She and my father-in-law had my husband later in life as a last chance to have a kid. My husband has a name like John William Smith, for the name has been passed down for literally generations. I will also mention, as it's important, there has not been a girl born on his side of the family in more than 100 years. There's a huge running joke that the men in his family cannot produce female babies. So fast forward to our wedding day in 2017. I've had a pretty good relationship with my mother-in-law up until this point. Wedding was great, a beautiful ceremony, funny speeches, everything was great. Really, until it's the end of the night and we are getting ready to go leave to enjoy our honeymoon suite and she looks me dead in the eye and says, "Now go make us our," insert my husband's name, plus an extra Roman numeral. I nervously laughed and we departed. Well, ladies and gents, I indeed did make a beautiful baby with my husband over those 2 weeks, and who would have thought, a baby girl. Everyone was so shocked when we announced it was a girl, and most of the family denied it up until the moment she was born. That's when the horrible comments started. Whenever my husband isn't around, my mother-in-law and her family members will make snarky comments like, "I wonder where she got that nose, it's definitely not my husband's." For your information, my baby, as beautiful as she is strikingly, obviously my husband's. She genuinely looks more and more like him as the first year has gone by, and even more so approaching 2. Well, as it would happen, we are now expecting our second baby. And, yep, another girl. I begged my husband not to tell my mother-in-law the gender when we found out, as I just wanted to enjoy a bit more of this pregnancy before she ruined it. I had decided to keep the mean comments his mother made to me about our first daughter to myself, as she's old and in poor health, and I felt guilty about potentially ruining their relationship when she probably doesn't have many years left to be around. I figure I'll add here that mother-in-law isn't dying or anything, she's just had extremely poor health her whole life, smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, eats garbage constantly, drinks only Diet Coke, refuses exercise, etc. I literally offered this woman water once after she almost passed out from walking 15 steps and she gagged and said, "That's disgusting, water makes me nauseous, get me my Diet Coke." So anyways, he insists on announcing it at our next visit, and holy crap y'all. As soon as she heard it was another girl, tears welled in her eyes and she started shaking her head back and forth and sobbing. She then started yelling at me, called me a whore, and demanded I get out of her house. My husband immediately stands up and starts yelling at her, asking what her problem is, and that she needs to apologize to me and watch her mouth in front of her grandkids. She says through broken wails, "Not ours. Not ours. Those 5 earls are not ours." She's a W word. A S word. My son did not make those jive earls. I start crying hysterically and pick up my daughter, who is utterly confused as to why daddy is yelling at grandma and mommy is now crying. My mother-in-law then looks at me and starts yelling, "I let you get away with it the first time. I took you and his family. I allowed my son to believe he fathered that brat, but I will not allow it again." My husband is now effing pissed y'all. Something I should mention here is that while my husband prepared his whole life to having a son, he was thrown on his butt when our daughter was born. He never knew that he could love any girl in the world as much as he loves our daughter. He has made several comments over the past year and a half that he never knew how deep love could go before he held our baby girl. I can 100% assure you, that if he had to save me, our daughter, or his mom, he'd save our daughter 10 times. He gets extremely pissed and starts screaming at her that she is out of line and how dare she call his daughter names. He then goes on to say that we are leaving, and until she comes to her senses, She will never see any of us again. She tried to say something more, but he cuts her off and yells at her, by the way, Mom, I love that little girl more than I ever loved you. As he is shuttling us out the door. I cried and broke down and told my husband all the little comments she and her family have said to me when he's not around while we drive the 2 hours home. He was so angry at them all and has been amazing in comforting me through it. We went NC for a few months and everything seemed to be going great. We blocked her and father-in-law phone numbers and hadn't heard from them except through other relatives over Facebook. We either told them to not attempt to relay messages from mother-in-law or they would be blocked, or ignored them completely. Then, when I was nearing my due date, we decided to be the bigger person and reach out to her and father-in-law and offer them a chance to make things right. She whines and whines that she misses my husband and granddaughter. We agreed to meet for dinner at their house after a few weeks for a proper talk and apology from her. We agreed that our daughter should not be present, so my sister was set to babysit her. We arrive, dinner is served and we're trying to make small talk when my husband is like, yeah, Mom. This has all been nice, but we need to talk about what happened and the things you said last time we were here. I know, and you know that you owe my wife an apology. Mother-in-law then looks at my husband and says, yes, do you have the test? My husband, what? Mother-in-law, the paternity test. I am not apologizing until I'm proven wrong. And we both know I'm right. You cannot be the father, and the fact that you have now apparently made 2 girls is ridiculous. My husband, what the heck is wrong with you? I start to cry and go to get up to grab my things and go to the car. Mother-in-law, oh no you don't. She shoots up, rounds the table and grabs my shirt, then proceeds to scream at me, how dare you try to run away from this, you're a effing whore and you need to own up to this problem. My husband screams at her to get her hands off of me, and starts to make his way towards us. She then decides that I cannot be allowed to leave at any cost with her son, so she slaps me as hard as she can across my face. I push her arm away from me as I let out a scream from the shock of being slapped. My husband then gets in between me and his mom and starts to scream at her. He tells father-in-law to call the cops right now. Father-in-law ignores him and tries to calm mother-in-law down, insisting that we can deal with this. My husband is furious and I'm crying hysterically. He grabs my hand and we are making our way to the door when mother-in-law grabs a snow globe from a shelf and throws it directly at me, and it hits me right in the back of my head. It didn't shatter or anything, but it did end up hitting me on the base and cut my head open. I fell to my knees from the pain, and before my husband can put together what just happened, she is grabbing anything she can find to throw in my direction. I'm on my knees on the ground holding my head with one hand and my belly with the other, being almost 9 months pregnant as a cascade of random items are being thrown at me. My husband is screaming at the top of his lungs for her to stop, and she proceeds to try to get close enough to kick me as hard as she can. Thankfully, she is old and in bad health, so she loses momentum quickly, and as a last resort my husband pushes his mom and she falls back into a shelf by the front door and he rushes me out. I'm crying and freaking out and yelling. She kicked my stomach over and over and he drives me to the hospital. I end up getting 6 stitches in my head and being monitored in hospital for 4 days because she kicked my belly. The baby ended up being fine, and the hospital demanded we file a police report. We find out that when my husband pushed his mom into the shelf, she ended up breaking 2 fingers and is claiming the excessive force hurt her neck very badly. Father-in-law called an ambulance for her and she claimed that me and my husband assaulted her in her doorway after they refused to let us in for a free dinner. Cops showed up and took our side of the story and compared our own report that we filed once at the hospital. They told us that mother-in-law is demanding to press charges against my husband for assault, while we are pressing charges against her. So then my husband gets arrested but then quickly released after father-in-law is forced to tell the truth, and mother-in-law then gets arrested for my assault. Father-in-law is now begging us to drop the charges as no one was hurt. What? I was effing hurt. And my baby could have been hurt, and that we are being cruel to lock up an elderly woman. He insists that we drop the charges, say it was all a misunderstanding, and he puts mother-in-law in counseling. Thing is, because my injuries were documented in hospital, we literally can't drop the charges even if we were stupid enough to do so. Because it was filed through a hospital, there's no way it can just go away. We are currently at home waiting for baby number 2 to arrive. I am on a strict bed rest order and my husband has taken the week off of work to help pamper me and take care of our daughter. I asked my husband if once baby number 2 arrives, we get paternity tests for both girls to send to his mom in jail, as a huge FU. He thinks it's a hilarious idea and thinks we should also make copies and send them to all the relatives who were entertaining his mom's craziness, along with a written letter saying goodbye. That none of them will ever see us or his daughters again, and that he hopes they're all happy knowing that they've ruined any chance they had to have a relationship with him, or our children ever again. We are so thankful that our baby girl is okay through all of this, and so relieved that we decided against bringing our older daughter to their house that night. We can only imagine what could have happened had she been struck with something. My due date is currently 8 days away and I have an appointment the day of to discuss induction if she hasn't arrived by then, and baby number 1 was a week overdue and I had to be induced last time after my mother-in-law hit me while I was pregnant because she thought I was cheating. I did a checkup on the baby. Baby does end up being alright in the end, even after my mother-in-law kicked me a handful of times while I was on the ground. So, this is where it turns for the worst. We are home, and my husband has been a rock, very supportive and comforting to me the whole time. We went no contact with my mother-in-law and father-in-law and I genuinely thought he was on my side. I had come up with the idea to do paternity tests on our girls and send them to my mother-in-law to get back at her, and it seemed like a great idea. We got in contact with a lawyer and he suggested that we take the paternity tests through the court so we have it as evidence and then the results couldn't be contested as fraudulent/fake. That sounded great, right? Well, over the next few days my husband got more and more depressed. He started trying to get me to entertain the idea of minimizing mother-in-law's actions, and chalking up her behavior to old age. While I am aware that she's older, she's pretty sound-minded. I told him that she will be getting full screenings for her mental health when we go to court, and that while yes, she's old, she doesn't get to assault me and accuse me of horrible things and use her age as an excuse. If she's found to have some mental issues going on then I can deal with that, but that doesn't mean I ever want to be around her or have her around my kids. A few days go by and I'm nearing my induction day because the baby girl isn't making her entrance, and I find out that my husband has been talking with father-in-law and mother-in-law behind my back. We get in a big fight and he tells me that he still wants his mom to meet her granddaughter, and that we can put this aside until the baby is here. Then afterwards, once she's gotten to meet her, we can resume the legal issues. I am crying at this point as I thought he was supporting me through this, but in reality he caved in no less than 4 days to his mom. I reminded him that we have put in for a restraining order and no contact order and that he has now broken it by contacting them. His response? Well, the no contact order is issued to you, not me. And the restraining order hasn't been approved yet, so mother-in-law can come meet baby girl number 2 before we get approved without breaking any rules. All I could do was shake my head and cry. I put my foot down and said absolutely not, and I couldn't believe he'd let his mom around me or the baby after she could have killed one of us. He said that I was overeating, as the baby was not injured and she wasn't actually trying to hurt the baby, just me. What? She kicked my very pregnant belly repeatedly after she threw a snow globe at my head. We got in a huge fight about me not forgiving her and holding grudges and being unreasonable, and eventually he just left. Where'd he go? Yep, his mom's house is a few hours away. He then called me sobbing and told me that if I could see his mom right now I'd understand. Apparently when he pushed her while she was assaulting me, he indeed broke 2 of her fingers and she sprained her neck when she fell back into a shelving unit. She's laid up on a sofa in her living room, can't walk and in a severe depression. I should feel awful according to him. The least I could do is let her meet her new grandchild, and then figure out where to go from there. I'm so infuriated at this point, because not only has he retreated to his mom's house, he left me alone with our oldest daughter who is 2, while I'm supposed to be in bed rest, with effing stitches in my head and an 8-pound baby in my uterus who refuses to come out, and I am so exhausted. He doesn't come home for the next 4 days until I'm supposed to check into the hospital for my scheduled induction. My sister comes to watch my oldest daughter and my husband takes me to the hospital for the induction. We get set up and they are poking me with things, shoving arms up where they don't belong, pumping me with Pitocin and waiting to see if baby will come. He mostly sat in the room on his tablet, as I was admittedly pretty cold/grumpy with him still and for this, but I'm looking for all points of view. Also, this is going to be very long because I just don't know what to leave out and honestly I need to vent some. Here is the story. A year ago, actually a year and a month ago, my girlfriend was roped as she was leaving work. Thankfully she was not unalived, however her attacker did threaten her with a weapon. Fortunately the store she works at had cameras in the parking lot, and between them getting video of the attack and the bank across the street getting the attacker's car on camera, the police were able to catch him within a day. Between the video and DNA testing he did not even contest, he just pleaded guilty in exchange for not receiving the max. Since there were aggravating circumstances, the weapon, the judge gave him a 20-year sentence, and with time for good behavior he can be out in about 10 years, give or take. I tell you all of that to make it clear that her attacker is no longer a threat. She doesn't have to fear him coming back for her at least for 10 years or so. Obviously this was a very traumatic event in her life, and while I was not a victim per se, it was also very traumatic for me as well. I can't imagine what she has gone through, and I don't compare my situation to her at all. But I have had severe bouts of depression because I couldn't protect her, and knowing someone else was harming her sometimes was almost more than I could handle. Right after the incident she did not want to see me. I get that, it hurt, but I understood. Her parents picked her up from the hospital and I did not see or hear from her for a week, which I sort of get, but I think I could have gotten a text or something just saying she was okay. Finally a week and her sister calls me and lets me know that she is staying with her parents and she will be calling me in a couple of days. She never called me. Instead I once again get a text from her sister saying she would like me to come over for a few minutes so we can talk. I get up and go over and am greeted at the door by her mother, who very calmly and very coldly starts laying out to me how I am to act and what I am to say. I am further instructed to not attempt to make any physical contact with her, as in hug or anything. Okay, again I get it. Major trauma. I'm sure they have been coached by therapists/counselors or something in what to say and do around her, so I play along. I walk in and she is sitting on a chair with her dad standing next to her and her sister sitting on the couch. As I walk in the room, the sister starts talking and telling me that my girlfriend wants me to know that she is okay, but obviously she has been traumatized and appreciates my understanding in her recovery. She never said one single word to me and barely looked at me. Again, this was right after the event and I'm understanding that this is how it has to be. But honest to God, that entire conversation was just awkward as hell. I leave, go home and attempt to focus on how I can help her. I start Googling how to deal with a rope survivor and what I can expect. She starts going to therapy initially 2 times a week, then after 2 months it goes down to 1 day a week. In the meantime she finally makes contact with me and asks to meet at a coffee shop. I get there and she is already there and waiting. At this point in time they had her so medicated that I was dealing with a zombie for the most part. There was no emotion and she was very methodical in her speech. Basically she wanted to get together that day to tell me that she couldn't go out with me for a while until she got past some issues she was dealing with. Of course I told her I understood. This was almost a month after the attack and this was our first conversation by ourselves, so I was already living under this assumption. I told her I would be there for her and that whatever she needed, whether that be space or a shoulder to cry on or anything, I was there for her. I started to tell her that I loved her and she stopped me. She told me that right now she didn't want to hear that and that I had to respect her wishes. I was once again a little hurt and frankly surprised, but I said whatever she wanted. She starts texting me the next day. Little things. Nothing important, but I think it is a big step in getting back to where we were. This goes on for another month and a half. I finally asked her at the month and a half mark if we could meet for dinner. She didn't reply for 2 days and then said that she had to wait for to talk to her therapist. Finally she agrees to this but sets the date for another month away. Now mind you, this is almost 4 months after the attack and so far I've had 1 physical conversation with her in person and 1 bizarre conversation with her and her family. Oh yay, I need to mention this. I am not being updated on her progress by anyone. Granted, I realize that I am not officially family nor am I entitled to do anything, but it would have been nice to just get a text or call or something from someone telling me that she was doing good in therapy or was not or anything. We go out to eat at a small bistro that we ate at all of the time. I met her there and I was waiting for her to show up. After sitting for a half hour waiting, I text to see what was up. I just get a text of on my way. She finally arrives and sits down. I ask her how she has been and she snapped at me and told me to not ask her personal questions. We ate and after dinner I wanted to just sit and talk because I missed the person I had talked to almost every day for the previous 3 years. But when she was done eating she said that she was ready to go home. I asked her if she could stay for just a few minutes to talk, but I could see that she was becoming physically anxious and I did not want to upset her, so I said that I loved her and missed her. She just walked away. She goes back to texting me the next day like nothing had been wrong. We actually start to see each other once a week for lunch and she is getting more and more comfortable with being out, so she sits and talks a while. She has also started a new job which she tells me about. This goes on for another 4 months. I'm happy to see her and all, but honestly I'm very lonely and we have not even so much as held hands. Then one day she doesn't show up for lunch. I text to see if she is okay. No reply. I call her parents to see if they know where she is and to make sure she is okay. I got the runaround from them and by this time I'm starting to get upset because I don't want to know where she was at or anything, I just wanted to know if she was okay. After actually saying that, her mom says, yes she is okay but don't expect to hear from her for a while. Well, that makes me start to thinking she has had a relapse and is in the hospital. But what can I do? All I do is go home and try and take my mind off of it. 2 weeks pass with nothing from anybody. I'm trying my best to be reasonable here, but basically I call her sister and ask if she is still alive or what. She knew I was getting frustrated, so she apologizes, but that her sister told them to specifically not let me talk to her. At this point I break down. I don't know what I've done wrong here. I have not pushed her. I have not tried to get her to be with me in any way other than to just talk to me, and even then I have had very generic conversations so as to not upset her. I then get a text from her asking if I would meet with her at an address I wasn't familiar with, but once I looked it up I determined this was a therapist office. I am told be there at 4, which meant I had to leave work early to get there. I check in at the front desk and am told that the therapist wants to speak to me alone for a few minutes. She comes in and I now know where the parents were getting this from, because after formally greeting me she then started to provide me with a list of do's and don'ts. She then told me that my GF wanted to speak to me and had something to tell me. I go in and she is sitting on one chair and I am instructed to sit in the other. She has a box of tissues and has been crying. The therapist tells me that I am here because my girlfriend has something to tell me and that she wanted the safety of therapist office to feel safe. She then proceeds to tell me that the reason she did not meet me for lunch that day is because she was with another guy, somebody from her new job, and that they had been intimate with each other. She might as well have taken a weapon out and shot me, it couldn't have hurt any more. I just drop my head and begin to cry. The therapist then pipes in with some logic about her taking back her sexuality since she was attacked and how this wasn't cheating in the same sense of cheating. My girlfriend then proceeds to tell me that she does not want to lose me and that she is just very messed up in the head and that it was a one-time thing and blah blah blah. I feel very trapped at that moment. I felt like I was ganged up on, and the more I set the matter I got. I finally just said to her, "You haven't so much as held my hand in the past half year, yet you can go F some guy you met at work while I sit like an idiot waiting for my junior high date." This of course caused her to go into hysterics and the therapist asked me to leave. I apologized and told her to text me if she wants to keep working this out. I get that text later that day. Now she is all chatty and crap telling me that this was the worst mistake of her life and please talk to her. I tell her that I don't know if I can go on with this but agree to meet her. I flat out tell her right up front when I see her that for me to even consider going forward with this that she has to cut this other guy off, period. She tells me that is impossible because they work together, and I tell her that I'm sorry but I won't even consider it if she is going to see this guy every day. She decides to find another job, and after talking with my sister, who I have told everything to, she said that while it is not common, some women do attempt to have intimacy after being attacked so that they feel like they have power again. Now why I am not the one who she did this with I have no idea, but I know I feel like I am being punished for something I did not even do. She changes jobs and we go back to our lunches, and I do this twice when I tell her that I am getting a little tired of just meeting for lunch and doing nothing else, so she agrees to come over to watch TV with me. That has been it up until tonight. Tonight she came over and we watched 2 movies and ate pizza. During the second movie I tried to give her a kiss. Nothing more, just a kiss. She backs away as though I was a cross and she was a vampire and tells me she is not ready for that yet. Okay. Not my finest moment here, I admit, but I tell her that it's been a year and a month and I have not tried one goddamn thing with her or forced her into anything, and yet she willingly F'd some other guy months ago, but here I am still waiting to hold hands. She of course starts crying, but this time I'm not as fast to apologize. I do apologize for the tone of my voice and tell her that I would never try and force her to do anything against her will, but honestly I feel like I have been kept on the outside. I've been cheated on. I don't give 2 craps what they call it. She willingly had unprotected intimacy with someone else, and I feel like I have done everything to try and be a supportive boyfriend. I tell her that honestly I don't want her to text me until I decide what I'm going to do. I don't want to be unfair to her, but by the same token a year is a long time and we are really no closer to being back to normal than we were 6 months ago, and I have no idea how long this will go on. Now here is the part where if you didn't think I was jerk before, you will now. I am just tired of not having intimacy. Look, I certainly understood not trying anything right afterwards and even months afterwards, but it's been over a year and we're not even holding hands, and frankly the fact that she has been with someone else since this incident is unaliving me inside. So I told her that I'm going to think things through and promise to talk with her next week sometime. But as it stands tonight I think I'm done. I love her. I hate the idiot who ruined both of our lives. I know this isn't her fault and I hate that I feel like crap no matter what I do. If I stay I'm going to be resentful, and even if she comes over tomorrow and has intimacy with me it will feel like either pity intimacy or desperation intimacy. But I know ending this will be punishing her for something that isn't her fault either. Advice? My God, this is way too long. TL, Dr. GF was roped over a year ago. In the meantime I have given her space and let her deal with things as she deems fit. We have not been together intimately since the attack. She on the other hand has been with another guy since. I think I'm done but looking for advice. Way, is this weird? I've been with my boyfriend for 2.5-ish years now. He's never been comfortable talking about his emotions. The only person he's ever confided in was his mother when he was a child/teen. Some people refer to him as a robot. Obviously in the past I'd expressed my desire for him to talk to me about things that are affecting him, but he just fobs it off. We've thought about it in the past and he has said he just cannot get the words out. Earlier this week his family found out that his mother will be passing very soon. As in potentially a couple of weeks even. It came as a surprise to all of them. I asked for advice on another sub earlier in the week about how I can make him feel comfortable being vulnerable around me. I'm rather introverted myself, so I was worried I would mess it up. Some kind people commented other types of intimacy I could try instead of words. One that stuck out to me was offering to wash his hair. I don't know why, just feel like I'd love if my partner offered to do it for me when I was feeling down. Well, when he eventually came home he looked rough as anything. I'd already made dinner so we sat down to eat it, but we pretty much ate in silence. He rarely even looked up from his food. I asked if he wanted to talk and again he fobbed me off. Once we'd finished I asked him if he'd like to shower with me. It would have been a couple days at least since he'd have been able to have one. I dimmed the bathroom lights and put some relaxing music we both enjoy on the speaker. Got the shower nice and hot, gently helped him undress and had him sit on the bench thing under the water while I finished undressing. I joined him on the bench and slowly washed him everywhere, taking breaks to rest my head on his or whisper something to him. I spent a while massaging his head as I washed his hair. I kept kissing him on the lips, forehead, neck and occasionally embracing him. Rubbed his shoulders and places I thought he'd be aching after being up and about for 2 days. There was nothing intimate about the atmosphere, it was a whole different type of intense intimacy, it's difficult to describe. He'd hardly said a word during all this and he looked like he could cry any minute. I wasn't sure what to say, I didn't want to pressure him into anything, so I just looked him in the eyes, smiled and said it's okay. Once we were done we both sat there for a while on the bench under the water, not speaking, just enjoying each other's company. I kept running my hand up and down his back, across his cheek or head. Just trying to make him relax as much as possible. Once I dried him and myself off, we got into bed and I stuck the TV on. I was half watching it and half playing with his hair. I asked if he wanted to talk about anything and he shook his head. I could tell he was really upset despite him trying to hide it. Maybe 20 minutes later I could see him literally on the verge of tears. I rolled to my side and put my arms around him, pulling him into my chest. That's when he started. The tears began to flow and he sobbed and sobbed. He was squeezing me so tight sometimes it wasn't easy to breathe. I could feel the years of bottled up emotions flowing out. He continued crying harder and it broke my heart. He said something about his mom but I couldn't hear as it was muffled. Seeing the guy you love like that, clinging onto you as though you were going to leave whilst he let it all out, hurt my heart. I felt so bad for him, I had some tears myself. I just held him tight and kept whispering how much I loved him, that it was okay, I'm here, I've got you, etc. Even when he eventually stopped sobbing he continued to have his arms wrapped around me so tightly with his face buried in either my stomach or chest. I continued just comforting him until he fell asleep. Usually I don't like cuddling when sleeping, but that night I held him all night long. I just couldn't bring myself to let him out of my grip. It's hard to explain the way I was feeling during this. Obviously terrible that he was going through this, but at the same time I was so happy, relieved. Is that weird? It was an emotional experience, seeing the guy you love more than anything show negative emotion on that level for the first time. I remember almost very detail of the night. It's etched in my memory. I haven't brought it up to him yet. I figured maybe it's best to let him talk about the evening when he feels ready. But then again I also want to be able to tell him that it was okay and a good thing he did. I think he's a bit embarrassed that it happened, so don't know if he'll bring it up. I hope he does though. I've read some women say that once they've seen their man cry they lose attraction. It seems bizarre to me. If anything I feel even more attracted to him than before. It's like it has amplified my love for this man. I never want to let him go. I left a little note on his bedside table before I went out on Sunday. I outlined that I enjoyed our shower time and spending intimate time together like that. I said that I don't expect him to bring it up if he doesn't want, that I know how hard it is for him to speak about those things, but I'll be here for him if he ever does. If he decides that he wants to write something, I'll read it, that I love him more than he can ever imagine. I said that I'd like him to feel free to ask me if I can shower with him whenever he needs. A Redditor pointed out that calling the whole act an easier name to say may make him more inclined to let me know when he wants to do it again. I didn't expect any response from him on the topic, to be honest. Later that evening though he handed me a small note before going into the other room to play his game. I won't go into details as it was only for me to read, but one line stood out to me the most. I don't have the words to express my gratitude, but I think you know, Thank you for making me feel human for the first time in so many years. The whole thing was so sweet I cried a few happy tears. I'm dreading his mother's passing, but I'm hoping he'll let me be there for him, even if it's just a shoulder to cry on. Well, some of you may have seen my previous regarding my boyfriend's mom's illness and my attempt to comfort him despite him being rather emotionally constipated all his life. Despite our experience the previous night, he didn't really show any emotion or want to be comforted in the previous weeks. I suspect he may have been slightly embarrassed about that evening. Whilst I reassured him about it, I didn't want to push the subject and make him regret doing it in the first place. Unfortunately, a few days ago his poor mom passed. I managed to see her a couple of days before and my boyfriend saw her the evening before. Once he found out, he shut himself in his office for hours. I tried knocking several times but never got a response. I could hear him moving around in there, so I knew he was physically okay. Late in the afternoon he eventually came out and sat down with me to watch TV. Neither of us said anything, but he looked rough as can be. I placed my hand on his knee and we both just sat there watching. I was kind of panicking because I couldn't think of anything to say that would make any difference to his pain. I got him to eat something and we just sat there. A couple of hours later he said that he was going to shower. Originally I just said all right, but then maybe 5 minutes later I realized that he probably wanted me to shower with him again but didn't feel comfortable asking. Kind of kicked myself for not thinking to offer him it earlier. Guess I was so caught up in thinking about what I should say that I completely forgot that I don't actually need to say anything but can show it instead. I undressed and joined him. It was a similar experience to the previous shower. It was a very intimate experience. Although I obviously don't enjoy the reason why we were doing it, I very much enjoyed taking care of him. Once we got out I again dried him off and I walked and tucked him into bed. Now this next part might be a tad controversial, but me and him both smoke Mary Jane occasionally. I normally will not allow any to be smoked in the house as personally I think the smell it leaves is unpleasant and grubby. On this occasion though I figured it would help him sleep and so got one of my pre-rolls. We both smoked it in bed whilst watching TV. He looked really upset and I was honestly surprised he hadn't cried so far. Some users previously mentioned that I asked if he was okay too much, so I made sure not to this time and didn't press it. I turned out the lights and we both tried to get some sleep. I could hear him sniffling a bit, so turned over and curled up against him in his arms. I didn't say anything, just laid there with him. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but my cat woke me up maybe an hour later and he was still awake. I moved up and swapped to being the one doing the holding. I rubbed his back and kissed his forehead. He just suddenly began crying. Not just the normal day-to-day tears you see from some people, these were heartbroken tears. I don't think I've actually ever witnessed anyone cry that hard in real life. It's a sound I never want to hear again. The pain he was feeling must have been insane. Again he buried his face in my chest and just cried and cried. I could literally feel him shaking. We were lying there for hours. I had my arms around him and one leg over him. He was squeezing me so tightly the whole time. He would occasionally drift off, loosening his grip on me in the process before waking up, starting to have some more tears and almost grabbing at me, pulling himself into me again. As though he was afraid he'd wake up and I wouldn't be there. It was heartbreaking. Every time I'd just squeeze him back and whisper that I'm there or something similar. I'd kiss his head and rub his back until he drifted off again. He never stayed asleep for long though. He properly fell asleep after maybe 3 or 4 hours of this drifting. And I stayed awake for maybe an hour past that just holding him. In the morning I woke up first, and when he woke he lay there for a moment before the tears started flowing again. We stayed in bed all morning just embracing each other. A user mentioned before that two people, lying naked together being vulnerable is the ultimate intimacy and honesty. Now I couldn't agree more. I've never felt so close to someone. I was feeling so many emotions, it was intense. He's cried in my arms a couple more times since at random points of the day. Whilst I'm obviously devastated for him, I can't help but be so grateful he's willing to allow me to be there for him. Crying in daylight out of bed is a huge step from only allowing himself to do it once in a dark bedroom. I'm honestly honored that he trusts me so much. Hopefully he continues to allow me to be there for him in whatever capacity possible. Today I saw a TikTok video where a girl was mocking an ex for crying in front of her, and it enraged me. I cannot begin to imagine how these people think like this, to have someone willing to be as vulnerable as possible in front of you, to be comfortable asking for help in their darkest hour and then turning around and fucking mocking them for it. It's disgusting, and I am so glad I am not one of these awful people. Anyway, that's it out. Just reading it back I can see how insanely long it is. I'm sorry. If you took the time to read, thank you. Don't need any advice, just helps me immensely to talk about this with someone. 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 To talk